Why David Brower? Why a David Brower Lifetime Achievement Award given by the students of Land, Air, Water, given by the co-directors of this conference? Who was David? First of all, our predecessors are important. Learning their stories is important. Going beyond them is important. That's your job. But with knowledge of our shared past, your history. If you have heard of the Sierra Club, it's because of David Brower. If you've heard of Friends of the Earth or the Earth Island Institute, it's because of David Brower. If you've heard of the Wilderness Act, it was partly due to David Brower. If you've heard of the North Cascades National Park, if you've heard of the preservation of the lower part of the Grand Canyon, it's David Brower. If you know something about David Brower, you might know he was expelled from the Sierra Club for being such an activist. Later, they reelected him. David was a mountaineer. He was with the 10th Mountain Division in World War II. He scaled the cliffs in Italy and the Dolomites to go after the Nazis, to go after the German army. David made 70 first ascents of mountains in his life, 32 of them in 1934 in a single trip in the Sierra Nevada. 32 first ascents. He was 21 years old. Of course, the Sierra Club was founded, as I hope 99.9% of you know, by John Muir of California. And by the 1940s, after the war, it was basically nothing more than a small hiking club. People went to the mountains and they hiked, and that's what it was. In 1952, David Brower was named executive director of the hiking club, and he was no mere mountaineer. He, for example, invented the idea of putting full-page ads in the New York Times, the greatest ad ever for the Grand Canyon. They were fighting against a dam, and the ad was, well, Flo Domini, the head of Bureau of Reclamation, proposed that it would be really cool because, there'd be water up there, and the tourists could see the canyon sides better. They'd be able to get there. And his ad said, would you flood the Sistine Chapel in Rome so tourists could get closer to the ceiling? The Sierra Club lost its tax exemption for this. Sierra Club didn't care. So what? We're going to keep advertising. We're going to keep politicking. We're going to be a nonprofit whether or not you give us a tax exemption. David was known for what I would call in-your-face activism. Some people here might have a relationship to that. Here's what David Brower said: polite conservationists leave no mark except for the scars upon the earth that could have been prevented had they stood their ground. Are there any polite conservationists here? I doubt it. Are there any impolite conservationists? If I were Mike Axline, who's sitting in the front row, and I want you to know, co-founder with the students of this public interest law conference, Mike, would you stand up, please? If I were Mike Axline, my ears would be attuned to, what's that sound we hear, Mike? Oh, that's what I thought. David Brower became a keynote speaker in 1988, and he opened this conference for nearly 10 years. It was David who really brought the spirit so much to this conference. So we're here to talk about, or to have awarded, the David Brower Lifetime Achievement Award. And to introduce that, we have the distinct pleasure of having Murray Rankin here. Murray Rankin is a Canadian, a lawyer, a politician. Previously, he was a professor at the University of Victoria in British Columbia, where he taught environmental and administrative law. Murray now serves as British Columbia's Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation. That sounds a little better than some of our titles of government officials, doesn't it? He previously served as a member of Parliament at the federal level of Canada, member for Victoria for 2012 to 2019. He was the Justice and Attorney General critic, the health critic when his party was out of power. And then for the New Democratic Party, he was the House leader. Here's a part I like. From 2019 to 2020, Rankin was head of Canada's National Security and Intelligence Review Agency, overseeing all national security and intelligence activities carried out by the government of Canada. In other words, he watched the watchers, something I think some of you activists wish you could do. So Murray Rankin is going to give the award, and I want to have him come to the podium with the words ringing in your ear, words that characterize both Murray Rankin and the award winner. These are the words that David Brower closed every introduction to this conference with. And think about this. Anything you can do or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. So thank you.
Thanks very much, John. And I just want to say it's just an honor to be back here. I was back, I think, 20 years ago or so. I spoke at this conference, and it's just truly an honor to be back. I want to thank John for his kind words. John really is truly one of my heroes, and I really salute his contribution to all of this. I want to start by thanking the Kalapuya people for their historic stewardship of this land, and I want to thank the organizers for allowing me to be here and giving me the distinct honor to make the presentation today to a person who I believe lives up to what David Brower said. And I want to try to persuade you of that if I can. The grandfather of the PIELC is how he's partly described, in addition to all the other wonderful things that John said about his career, because he's an individual who took a vision, took the skills that he had, and then he turned it into community, which is the theme of this conference. He turned it into a worldwide movement. The power of one individual really needs to be recognized and acknowledged. So my job is to tell you why Calvin Sandborn is in that pantheon of stars. But I have to start with talking about where he's from, because he's from a little town called Oroville, California. I know he's from Canada, but he grew up in Oroville, California. And his wife, Marnie, told me that on more than one occasion, they would be going to Oroville to visit, and they'd stop for gas, and the attendant would ask them where they're going. And they would reply, well, we're going to Oroville. And then there was this pause, and they said, the attendant would say, why? Because apparently it is known as the most redneck town in the state of California. And so therefore, how Calvin, whose story I'm going to try to summarize, managed to do what he's done, I think is the subject of a psycho documentary someday that will be really interesting. Because he bounced around a lot. A few vignettes. I once had the opportunity when I was a prof at UVic Law School to serve as a commission counsel, like on an environmental assessment inquiry. Some mad inventor from New Jersey wanted to establish something called a ferrochromium mine in northern Vancouver Island, in essentially a wilderness area. And Calvin acted for, at that inquiry, the environmental community. And it was an amazing, let's just say not everybody agreed with Calvin's perspective, because one night he was walking home and a can of beer just missed his head as he was walking back to his hotel room. So let's just say his contributions haven't always been universally acclaimed. But it was an incredible story. The guy sat there, the proponent, reading Alice in Wonderland upside down. I'll give you some idea for the nature of the inquiry Calvin was part of. And he said in his testimony, Mr. Wooding was his name, that the state of Oregon had approved the project, but he really wanted to benefit the fine people of British Columbia with his project. Calvin had used FOI or something to find out that, in fact, it had been turned down in Oregon. And so the chair of the panel leaned over and said to Mr. Wooding, "Sir, it would be helpful if you could confine yourself to the truth." Needless to say, Calvin was a great cross-examiner and made an enormous difference in that way. You know, he's an amazing wordsmith. I want to tell you, he wrote so many editorials on environmental issues and newspapers and law reviews and so on. But one thing that I thought was really cool was a couple years ago, he wrote a book. He wrote a book called Becoming the Kind Father, A Son's Journey, and it was a finalist for the Audible Book Association of America Book Award that year. He came second. But it's even more extraordinary when I tell you who won that in that category, someone called Oprah Winfrey. So pretty amazing. He went up and went to the University of British Columbia Law School, which is in Vancouver. He got active with the farm workers. Now, you all know about Cesar Chavez, but you may not know about the fate of poor Punjabi-speaking workers in the fields, harvesting strawberries, harvesting blueberries. Calvin got involved at law school in law reform issues involving them, particularly on pesticides, but also on working conditions as well, and made an enormous difference in that part of his career. And then he applied and worked at the West Coast Environmental Law Association. Some of you know that organization. Some of its members are active in the e-law that are here and are here. He went from 86 to 92 doing that work, tripling their budget, trying to get things done in a good way. And then he got involved in what we called interest-based negotiation and creating, we called a commission called the Commission on Resources and Environment. He was lawyer in that organization, and an enormous amount of old growth and other areas were protected in that process. He then got a real job. He worked for the Forest Practices Board of British Columbia, where he actually made money. But here's what I think the neatest thing about his job was: he got laid off. There was a severance package, and suddenly there was an opening for something called the Environmental Law Center at the University of Victoria Law School. And he applied, but there was one catch. They had no budget for him, zero. So what he did was he raised the money. He started with his own severance from the job I described, a public sector job. And then one day this letter arrived from one of the Gulf Islands, like the San Juan Islands. Thinking it was some hippie just saying nice things, he discovered that the author of the article had just invented something using digital X-ray technology and made $870 million. So suddenly Calvin sharpened his pencil and thought, you know, I'm going to ask this guy for some money. And he did that so effectively that he got $1 million, and then he got another $5 million to continue the work. And the Environmental Law Center is really a thriving operation that Calvin was counsel at for many, many years, just left this past year. He's done so much important work. I couldn't summarize it. Flame retardants. We managed to hook up handsome firefighters and southern resident killer whales to say fire retardants, flame retardants ought to be banned. And thanks to Calvin's work, another ELC victory, flame retardant chemicals were banned at the federal level in Canada a few years ago. To wrap up, I just want to say a few things. I'm very proud that I had the opportunity to be co-chair of the Environmental Law Center with him. And I want to say the thing that is so impressive about Calvin is his infectious enthusiasm. It's not fair to, you know, the students love Calvin. He energizes them. He's the real deal, and they can see it. We brought 27 of those students down here last year to this conference, and he's just such a mentor to those students. He has given an entire generation of environmental lawyers, in my opinion, a sense of purpose. The late Albert Hirschman spoke of what he called the liberating experience of working in the public interest. I think that's Calvin all over. What I value most about Calvin is his amazing enthusiasm, his positive attitude, even in the face of environmental atrocities. Justice and fairness are in Calvin's very DNA. His love for social justice, his love for the environment. I really see Calvin Sandborn as the embodiment of love in action. Like David Brower, Calvin has harnessed his personal talents, he's created community, and he's helped make our world just a little bit better. He really has changed the world. He has touched the lives of so many people, made each of us better. And what better tribute can we give to Calvin than to gratefully acknowledge that indisputable fact? Thank you, Calvin. Come up here. I want to give you an award. Beautiful.
Nice. Yeah.
Very beautiful. I'll get out of here.
That's my speech.
Got your solution there?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Take care.
Wow. So I want to thank people that made it possible for me to be here. Rosalia Ginsburg is here, and her husband Dick was my best friend. She's just in the middle of the audience there. They met in Paraguay, where he was working in the Peace Corps, and Dick taught me that applying love to social justice, you could make a real difference. And so I want to first dedicate this to Dick and Rosalia Ginsburg, this international romance that brought so much love and so much reform to farm worker laws in both Oregon and Colorado. Thank you, Rosalia. And Brian's here. And I want to thank Murray, who's been a very good friend all these years, and John Bonine, who is an absolute inspiration and not just a national treasure, but an international treasure. The fellow that really sparked PIELC and ELAW. What incredible examples of community, of building community nationally and internationally. So I want to thank John Bonine. And I want to thank Mark Haddock, former lawyer at EcoJustice and West Coast, who's always been a very true friend. And I want to thank mostly my wife, Marnie, who's just the inspiration of so many ideas. All my best ideas are actually Marnie's. And I want to thank my kids, Kathleen and Kristen and Nikki. I want to thank the Canadian Farm Workers Union that taught me how to struggle and how to win workers' compensation and health and safety regulations for farm workers. I want to thank ELAW, which is this incredible thing. ELAW is community in action. It's beloved community. I'm going to talk about the beloved community. ELAW is the beloved community. Like, it's one of the great joys of my life to come down to the ELAW conferences and get drunk and sing songs with the ELAW people. So let's hear it for ELAW. I want to thank the Environmental Law Center and the 26 Environmental Law Center students that are here, came down from Victoria. Thank you for coming, because you actually have made my success possible. It's the team, it's the magic of taking law students who are looking for experience and putting them together with dedicated activists that are looking for some legal help. You put that together and it is magic. Thank you. ELC law students, can you stand up? There they are, UVic ELC law students. And of course, I want to thank PIELC, but I want to say a few words here. That I'm deeply honored to receive this award. And I just want to point out that when David Brower gave that first keynote speech in 1988, I was in the audience. And he was eloquently describing how he and Ansel Adams had invented basically the modern environmental campaign and talked about all those successes that John referred to. And at the end, of course, David Brower called us to arms, as he always did, ending with Goethe's words, "Whatever you can do or dream you can do," thank you, John, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. There's magic in you, he concluded. Let it out. So I went home to Victoria and I put those words on the wall above my computer. And then as I issued challenges to powerful governments and powerful corporations, I would be a bit trepidatious because I'm just a kid that grew up in a mobile home. And so what am I doing challenging an international company? But I would look at those words, and those words gave me courage. And I would suggest to you that we all need courage today. In the state of the world, we need courage. And just the tip that having those words on the wall gave me, oh yeah, I can be bold, I can challenge these things. So that's what I got from in 1988 from David Brower, was those words. So it's decades later, and I'm on the podium, and you sit where I once sat, and I will soon pass, but you will continue. What words can I share that might be of use? The greatest challenge of our time is what I want to talk about, the climate emergency. Because we all know that climate change is bearing down like a runaway train on us, with ever more catastrophic wildfires, heat domes, and atmospheric rivers. And the pressing question in all of our minds is, can we turn this around? And realistically, it looks very grim. But there is still hope. You can still just imagine a path where we can slash greenhouse gases. We might have a few rough decades. And then 100 years from now, 200 years from now, our grandchildren or great-great-grandchildren could inherit a safe climate. Perhaps they could even inherit a better climate future than we have. We must cling to that hope. And most important, we cannot surrender to climate fear. A lot of people are surrendering. But pessimism is a luxury we cannot afford. The stakes are too high for despair. Somehow, we must find courage to face the fear and move to action. Like the people of London who faced the apocalyptic World War II blitz, like the people of the Ukraine today, and like the heroic lawyer Alexei Navalny, we too must somehow find the courage within us. Your generation confronts Plato's existential question. How then shall we live? How do we live a meaningful life in a world that is shadowed by fear? The startling fact is that you actually have a unique opportunity to lead lives of great purpose. For there can be no greater meaning in life than to work together to save the future of the human race. And in that work ahead, ancient wisdom counsels us to choose hope over fear and love over anger. Indeed, pragmatism demands that we be guided first by love, because love frees us and opens up solutions, creative solutions. A famous Vermont environmentalist put it very well. On her 100th birthday, she was asked, "What advice can you give to the young? What is the secret to a meaningful life?" And she replied, "There are just three things: love yourself, love others, love nature." Martin Luther King lived in a time as divisive as our own, fighting some of the same political currents, and indeed, some of the very same people, like the Koch family, the Koch brothers, that we face today. And King brought down a fascist political system in the segregated South, and he brought it down while he was wielding a little book of his sermons that he titled Strength to Love. Because his basic message was community. He called all to join together in a beloved community. And he clung tenaciously to that vision of community, even when the Ku Klux Klan bombed the house where his wife and children lay sleeping. You know the story. An angry crowd gathered, many of them vowing revenge. A black man threatened a policeman with a gun, others brandished broken bottles. But Martin Luther King stepped out onto his shattered porch, a porch which still smelled of dynamite, and he called on his neighbors to love their enemies. And he said, "They are not our enemies. We will change their hearts." And in the end, he changed a nation's heart. And the US segregation system collapsed. But his impacts went far beyond the United States. A lot of Americans forget this. He changed things in South Africa, because in South Africa, Nelson Mandela was in prison, and he read about what Martin Luther King was doing. He read about the beloved community, and he adopted King's nonviolent methods to bring down South African apartheid. And in Warsaw, Poland, Lech Walesa read about Martin Luther King. And in Czechoslovakia, Victor Havel read about Martin Luther King. And in all the Eastern European countries that had been part of the Soviet Union, the insurgent people read about Martin Luther King. They read about his concept of community, a beloved community, and nonviolent action. And they moved forward and they freed their countries from Soviet communism. And other parts of the world have been moved by this concept of community and love, because King himself had learned much of his loving approach from his hero. Martin Luther King's hero was Mahatma Gandhi. And you'll remember that Mahatma Gandhi defeated the most powerful empire in the world. He defeated the British Empire and freed India. And what did he say? He didn't make smug jokes on late night television. Mahatma Gandhi said, "My goal is friendship with the world, and I can combine the greatest love with the greatest opposition to wrong." Martin Luther King's call for a beloved community transformed the world, and it defeated the reactionary forces that still plague us today. And as I shuffle off the scene, I would urge upon you that we need King's approach once again to heal the social divisions that are preventing united action on climate. And fortunately, this idea of a beloved community is the most compelling idea in history. And it may be the only idea that can defeat the rising tide of fear, hate, anger, and frankly, fascism. Because the opposite of fascism is not communism. The opposite of fascism is love. We here have a beloved community. We have it at ELAW. We have it at PIELC. We have been drawn to this room because we have fallen in love with the earth and with each other. We fell in love with nature in different ways. We have seen the photos of the earth from space, a fragile blue-green emerald with a thin layer of air, water, and land that supports the only life in the universe. We have stood open-mouthed as orcas leapt out of the ocean. We have seen the heron silently stalking fish in a lagoon at dawn. We have watched eagles clenched together riding the updraft. We have seen the salmon runs, tragic as Shakespeare, joyful as Easter. And these wonders have touched us in the deep heart's core. Yes, we have fallen in love with the earth and with each other. We have found community with each other as we hiked together in alpine meadows. We have found community as we sang songs around campfires. We have found community as we lay on the earth under a vast canopy of stars, talking half the night with our friends, our brothers and sisters. And we have found community in recent years as Indigenous elders opened our eyes to Sister Cedar, the trout children, and all of our relatives. But now, to save Sister Cedar, the trout children, and our own grandchildren, We have to find a way to extend that beloved community to conservatives, to Republicans, and a whole bunch of people we may not agree with on other issues. Like Martin Luther King standing on his porch, we must win them over with a true and a beautiful vision, a vision of a common future for everyone's kids, a healthy planet with a healthy climate, with jobs, houses, and food for all. We must share our love for nature, its beauties and wonders, and our sense of community and our love for all people, including miners and loggers and oil patch workers. And most important, we must share our love for our children, our grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. We must stress the common destiny of every single person on planet Earth, no matter their political party. Because we all share the same fate in an earth on fire. To paraphrase Benjamin Franklin, we will all stand together on the climate issue, or we will all fry together. It is urgent for us to reassemble the consensus that we once had on climate change. Remember that in 1992, we had that consensus. In 1992, the polls showed that 88% of Americans agreed that climate change was a very serious problem that must be dealt with very seriously. Now, that consensus was undermined after the oil industry ran ad campaigns obscuring the science and dividing the public against environmentalists. And oil money fanned division because they don't believe in community. They believe in this polarity thing. It's kind of working to stop action. But the oil money fanned divisive culture wars that led to, they fooled people into hating each other and voting against their own climate future. But the important thing is here that the only thing more powerful than misinformation, anger, and fear that drive today's anti-climate movement, the only thing more powerful than that is the power of love. It's the secret weapon, which is the love of a parent for a child, the love of every grandparent for every grandchild. Our essential message must be to appeal to that inborn compassion for children, because caring for children is in our DNA. It's in human DNA to love your children, to keep the race going. This caring for future generations is an evolutionary drive. It's a natural selection imperative. It's a powerful biological force. And that is a force that can save the world. Love for grandchildren can trigger what the world has been missing, the true empathy for the children who are going to inherit the earth in the year 2100. Our most effective defense against industry-funded grievance politics is to consistently practice the politics of a shared beloved community and a shared destiny for all of our children. If we can adopt Gandhi's goal of friendship with the world, we can succeed. And here's the hard part for us here, folks. This means we have to check our sense of superiority at the door. And we need to abandon cynicism and judgmental criticism, finger pointing and intolerance. As we invite all people to work together, it doesn't help if we're making smug jokes about working class people. Making fun of people that oppose us on policy can be deeply counterproductive and can turn potential allies into adversaries. The simple fact is that we're all in the same boat, all on the same earth, all just human beings. We need a little less calling people out. But certainly sometimes we have to call people out. But what we really need a lot more of is calling people in. We need to invite and persuade everyone to work together and keep this fragile boat afloat. We need to resist looking down on other people. We need to constantly remember our common humanity, our common frailties. Humility is essential. Most of all, in the existential quest to save the future, we need you to be loving and persuasive leaders. Nature not only needs you to give voice to the river and to the forest, to speak for the grizzly, the marmot, the caribou, and the falcon. You must also speak for every child and for every human heart, whether they be Republican, Democrat, or whatever, every human heart that loves a grandchild. All of you, law students, lawyers, activists, and leaders, you now have a grand opportunity to work together in community to save the natural world. And no life can be more meaningful, more full of purpose, more satisfying than to work to save our earth in this time of its greatest peril. Indeed, if we can reach out to the broader community with a positive message, I believe humanity has a shot. And if we fail, it will be tragic. Yet still, we will have had moments of beauty, moments of loving each other, and of building community. And we will have had a noble quest more consequential than Star Wars. At the very least, we will have led lives of purpose. On the other hand, if we succeed, we will be heroes to coming generations they will proclaim that this was our finest hour. And a future Shakespeare may write of our beloved community and write, "This story shall every good parent teach their child, and Crispin Crispian shall ne'er go by from this day to the ending of the world, but we in it shall be remembered, we few, we happy few, we band of brothers and sisters." Now that would be a life worth living. In conclusion, I wish you well in your mission to save Mother Earth and all of the children to come. And as David Brower admonished me in 1988 when I sat where you sit, I just leave you with those words once more. Go forth, whatever you can do or dream you can do, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. There is magic in you. Let it out. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. What a hard act to follow. Uh, everyone, I am Mary Wood. I teach at the University of Oregon Law School and serve as faculty director of its Environmental and Natural Resources Law program. And I just want to congratulate our amazing award winner and thank Calvin for what are truly legacy remarks that will stay in our hearts, surrounded by our love for years and years to come. And I want to thank the co-directors too. We just can't thank them enough, and all of the students who have worked so hard to put on this conference. Wouldn't happen without you. Thank you so much. So I know you can all sense, as I do, the great energy and momentum building in PIELC. And it will be my great honor to introduce today's extraordinary keynote speaker, Dune Lankard. But before I do, I would like to say a few words about the Public Interest Environmental Law Conference and about a person who has been at the heart of PIELC since the very beginning. PIELC has become an institution in the global environmental movement. There's just nothing like it in the world. organized solely by the students of Land, Air, Water. This conference, now in its 42nd year, has brought over 50,000 people from across the globe together to champion the public interest and, in the process, to cultivate community. You know, there's a famous quote by Margaret Mead. It's one of my favorites. She said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful and committed people can change the world. Indeed, that is all that ever has." PIELC's origin takes us back to 1983, when UO law professor John Bonine, along with the recently hired Professor Mike Axline, got together with U of O law students and decided to launch an annual conference that could grow the field of public interest environmental law. And you see, put yourself back then, there were multitudes of private industry lawyers out there who had ample support to wreck the environment. And the public interest lawyers defending nature and communities were very few and isolated. And so this small group of U of O law professors and students had a vision. If they could convene public interest lawyers along with the activists, they could educate people, share strategies, make valuable connections, and inspire change. And from the beginning, PIELC was student organized entirely. And that first PIELC drew 75 people. From then on, PIELC became a global platform, connecting lawyers and activists and students and educators and scientists and journalists and policymakers, citizens, all working in diverse ways. The person who has remained at the center of this effort for all of these 42 years is Professor, and reflects the soul of PIELC. And recognizing John's enormous contributions, the PIELC has announced his retirement from the law school after 46 years of teaching. We might briefly reflect on his extraordinary impact in the global environmental movement. Professor Bonine is a pioneer of public interest environmental law as a practice for the people. Throughout his career, he has built a support system for grassroots environmental lawyers in the US and around the world. He created the world's first environmental law clinic at the University of Oregon Law School. And that clinic fought successfully in court to save the magnificent old growth forests in Oregon and Washington. And it continues today in the form of the very highly successful Western Environmental Law Center. John also co-founded ELAW, the Environmental Law Alliance Worldwide, which unites 300 lawyers from 70 countries around the world in defense of nature and communities. ELAW had its beginnings at PIELC in 1989 when attorneys from around the world came from several countries and decided they needed to organize. And every other year, ELAW holds its annual conference to coincide with PIELC. And this is their conference year, and lawyers from around the world are here with us right now. John also, yes. John also co-authored with his late wife, the incredible Svetlana Kravchenko, the first casebook on human rights and the environment. He created a domestic network of public interest environmental lawyers in the United States, and he brought together environmental law professors from across the country in a national listserv so that we could share information and perspectives on a daily basis. He originated the concept of the private public interest law firm to inspire solo practitioners to make a living doing public interest environmental law. And so you can see that John is a connector who ignites passion in others. He is known around the world for his support of activists, from the forests of Malaysia to the mountains of Ukraine to the prairies of Africa. And while John has remarkable global reach, he still holds this community close. We cannot thank you enough, John, for all you have given to this conference and to our community far and wide. And it is now my genuine joy and privilege to announce, on behalf of the conference co-directors, their creation of the John Bonine Keynote Address. This year's co-directors have created this annual named keynote address to provide the platform and travel resources and support to a person that the conference co-directors alone will choose each year to uplift diverse and traditionally underrepresented voices at the conference. I can think of no better way to recognize John and his enormous legacy for years to come. And so please stand, John, so we may applaud this moment. And now I have the immense privilege of introducing the inaugural John Bonine Keynote speaker. And I can think of no better person to hold this honor than my longtime friend and a person of remarkable vision, Mr. Dune Lankard. Oops.